The Salamanca vision, a more sure word of prophecy. Nothing to fear. We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us and his teaching in our past history. Today we'll look at history so we can understand the different doctrines in Adventism, meaning why are there two different beliefs on who the King of the North is, or even who our God is from one true God or Trinity. And so it is in Adventism, we have seen two different beliefs on different doctrines. Well, which is true and which is a counterfeit? And so we're also going to be looking at today the confederacies that have brought them in. You know what a confederacy is? Ellen White says, it is a union of men in a work that does not bear the stamp of pure, straightforward, unswerving integrity. Now, apostasy started with a confederacy in heaven between Satan and other angels, and soon after between the Jews. She wrote, but the Jews were obstinate. Their own ideas and customs and practices were their idols. Would they give up their own misinterpretations, which they had taught the people to regard as sacred doctrines? No, never. They formed a confederacy to stand by the old traditions. And like the Jews, there were confederacies in the early days of Adventism, and studying them will help us see why there is confusion in doctrine within the Adventist faith, why there are different views on one true God and Sabbath and sanctuary and three angels, messages, King of the North, the daily, and even spirit of prophecy. But we know there is only one truth, and all the others are counterfeits, not led by God. Sadly, the men bringing the counterfeit doctrines profess to be Adventist men of God, Adventist church leaders. Now, are God's people also in a confederacy formed by men? No, we are bundled by God, and we're bundled by truth. There are lessons for us to learn from history today and to not be discouraged or reject Adventism or SOP. The confederacies and the counterfeit doctrines are the work of Satan to destroy the work of God and the champions of God. A spirit of strife and confusion entered into the Adventist movement in the beginning and continued on and will till the end. Confederacies, divisions, disassociations, strife, confusion, they all come from Satan. But we know God's word, his truth, his movement prevails. Much like with the beautiful truth of biblical cosmology in Genesis 1:1, this was said by Sister Ellen White about the Protestant churches rejecting the first angel's message in the 1840s. After the message of warning was given, a confederacy was formed that would not receive the message. They kept themselves barricaded, fearing that if they should evidence that they did receive light, there was a trap door ready to let them through into some dangerous pit. Thus have the nominal churches dealt with the message from heaven. The professed Protestant world will form a confederacy with the man of sin, and the church and the world will be in corrupt harmony. Hence, the great crisis is coming upon the world. Today, we're going to look at the vision of Ellen White in 1890 and a secret meeting by the Advent leaders. The next week, we're going to look at a secret conference in 1919 to understand specifically the people and events leading up to the modern doctrine on the daily in the Adventist Church. The following week, we will dig into the two main views of the daily from a line upon line approach, true plowgirls. But today, we're going to look at this incredible Salamanca vision, and it was given to Ellen White by God in this little town in New York called Salamanca on November 3rd, 1890. Now, I've pieced this presentation together from different excerpts. So there are entire manuscripts written about it. And then I've just gone through and read them all and put them all together in order. I learned about the Salamanca vision from another ministry. And it was such an incredible vision that I went and looked at the manuscripts myself. And so here's my best view of this incredible vision that God gave Ellen White. Much of this vision was buried by the General Conference. There were thousands of manuscripts that they determined not to make available to the public. It was released in 2015 after someone hacked into the files and forced them to go public. Some of the accounts give a negative view of individuals in the conference working against the truth. But as Scripture says, we can do nothing against the truth, only for the truth. November 3rd, 1890. It was winter in New York, and a deep snow had fallen. Before given by God the Salamanca vision, she had fallen into deep snow. Ice water filled her boots and soaked her legs, and she caught a deep inner body chill and a bad cold where she could not hear her own voice. Ellen White had scheduled meetings to make, but likely could not attend due to the debilitating illness. She wondered about returning to Battle Creek for healing, but brought the matter before the Lord. While engaged in earnest prayer, I was lost to everything around me, she says. The room was filled with light, and I was bearing a message to an assembly that seemed to be the General Conference. I was moved by the Spirit of God to make a most earnest appeal, for I was impressed that great danger was before us at the heart of the work. I had been and still was bowed down with distress of mind and body, burdened with the thought that I must bear a message to our people at Battle Creek to warn them against a line of action that would separate God from the publishing house. I was moved by the Spirit of God to say many things, to make most earnest appeals, for the truth was urged upon me that great danger lay before those at the heart of the work. I had been and still was bowed down with distress of mind and body. It seemed to me that I must bear a message to our people at Battle Creek. The words were to be in earnest. Speak the words that I shall give thee, to prevent their doing things which would separate God from the publishing house, and sacrifice pure and holy principles which must be maintained. There is no time to lose. God speaks. Men are serving the enemy and betraying sacred principles. I had a very marked experience, which I hope never to forget. Through the night season, I was in communion with God. I was taken out and away from myself and was in different states and assemblies, bearing a decided testimony of reproof and warning. I was in Battle Creek, and in a council assembled, there were ministers and responsible men from the review office. There were sentiments advanced, and with no very gentle spirit urged to be adopted, which filled me with surprise and apprehension and distress. Years before, I had been called to pass over similar ground, and the Lord had revealed to me many things of importance and given me warnings to be given to his people decidedly. I was commanded to hold the same before them perseveringly and not to fail or be discouraged in this work. For the men who ought to live so close to Jesus Christ that they could discern his voice, receive his counsel, and keep his way would become exalted and would walk in the sparks of their own kindling. They were not spiritual, could not discern the devices of Satan, and were ignorant in a large degree of his workings. They would adopt plans which appeared wise, but Satan was the instigator of these measures. If these men had the molding of the work, God would be dishonored. Again and again since 1845, the dangers of the people of God have been laid open before me, and I have been shown the perils that would thicken about the remnant in the last days of time. These perils have been revealed to me down to the present time, and on the night of November 3rd, there was laid out before me some things which I could not comprehend. But the assurance was given me that the Lord would not allow his people to be enshrouded in the fogs of worldly skepticism and infidelity. But if they would follow his voice, rendering obedience to his commandments, he would lead them above the mists of skepticism and unbelief and place their feet upon the solid rock where they might breathe the atmosphere of security and triumph. This is the next day after the vision. Ellen wanted to give her vision. Tuesday forenoon, November 4th, was the time set for the departure for Salamanca. In the morning, Elders A.T. Robinson and W.C. White called to see where Mrs. White had decided to do. Then she told them of her experience of the evening before and of her peace and joy through the night. She said that during the night she had no inclination to sleep, for her heart was so filled with joy and gladness. Many times she had repeated the words of Jacob, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. This is none other but the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." She was fully decided to attend the meetings according to the appointment. Then she proposed to tell the brethren what had been shown her regarding the work in Battle Creek. But her mind immediately turned to other matters, and she could not relate the vision. Ellen White was shown, but did not understand why God told her about Samuel 8, that she was to share it to the people and to the ministers. But she obeyed and delivered the message in meeting shortly after the Salamanca vision. This is what she preached. When Israel demanded a king to judge us like all the nations, the thing displeased Samuel. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people, in all they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of the land of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me, and served other gods, so do they also unto you. But the solemn words of the prophet had no effect on the minds of the people. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us, and go out before us, and fight our battles. She also shared this. He who wept over impenitent Israel, noting their ignorance of God and of Christ their Redeemer, looked upon the heart of the work at Battle Creek. Great peril was about the people, but some knew it not. Unbelief and impenitence blinded their eyes, and they trusted to human wisdom and the guidance of the most important interest of the cause of God relating to the publishing work. In the weakness of human judgment, men were gathering into their finite hands the lines of control, while God's will, God's way, and counsel were not sought as indispensable. men of stubborn, iron-like will, both in and out of the office, were confederating together, determined to drive certain measures through in accordance with their own judgment. So I'll just give a summary of the things that were shown to Ellen White in the Salamanca vision, and then what she shared at the New York conference in 1890. Now, this must have been a very long vision God gave her. Ellen had a vision the day before, and that would have been November 3rd, 1890, about confederacies in the General Conference regarding specifically the publishing work, and then also medical work and the wages and the special SDA committee of 21 and the NRLA, the Spirit of Prophecy, and then that beautiful message in 1888, Righteousness by Faith. The vision showed confederacy with the world and with the NRLA making its division non-sectarian, ecumenical, all the way back in 1890. The vision showed the NRLA seeking to bring the American Sentinel under NRLA control. And then Ellen spoke on the Bible accounts in Israel asking for a king, and about Elijah versus Ahab's, the altar of Baal, applying it directly to Adventism. Ellen stated very strongly that the General Conference was no longer the voice of God. The General Conference was controlling every aspect of work, of God's work, and abusing its authority. Ellen called on people to stand for the truth and labor with all their might for the truth. Ellen tried sharing her vision, but she could not recall or share it. After finishing these general meetings, Ellen returned to her home in Battle Creek and prepared for the General Conference, which was March 5th through 25th, 1891. When the conference opened, she was asked to speak to the workers each morning in the week at 5:30. On Sabbath afternoon, she addressed the conference. In the Battle Creek Tabernacle, before 4,000 of her workers and believers, she stood and read as her text, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven." The discourse was a powerful appeal for Seventh-day Adventists to hold forth the distinctive features of their faith. Then she said in substance, "While at Salamanca, New York, matters of importance were revealed to me. In a vision of the night, I seemed to be here in Battle Creek, and the angel messenger bade me, 'Follow me.'" She hesitated. The scene was gone. She could not call it to mind. She continued to speak of how we must hold forth the distinctive features of our faith. And then she said, "I must tell you of the vision which was given to me at Salamanca, for in that vision important matters were revealed to me. In the vision, I seemed to be at Battle Creek. I was taken to the Review and Herald office, and the angel messenger bade me follow me." Again she faltered. It had gone from her. She went on with her sermon, and a third time that afternoon she attempted to recount that vision, but she was not allowed to tell it. Finally she said, "Of this I shall have more to say later." She rounded out her sermon in about an hour's time, and the meeting was dismissed. Everyone had noticed that she was unable to recall the vision. So 2 or 3 times during the discourse, she began to tell the story of her experience at Salamanca, and each time she hesitated, and leaving the story untold, proceeded with other lines of thought. And this discourse made a profound impression on the large congregation. Late in the afternoon, a ministers' meeting was held in the east vestry of the tabernacle. Mrs. White was present, and pleaded for a deeper consecration. At the close of this special meeting, she was asked by Elder O.A. Olson if she would attend the ministers' meeting Sunday morning. She replied that she had done her part and would leave the burden with him. Then it was planned that Elders Olson and Prescott should lead the meeting. That Saturday night, at the conclusion of the meeting of the General Conference in the Tabernacle, as our church was called, the people went to their places of abode, but not all the people went home. For at the conclusion of that evening meeting, a little group of men went to the old Review and Herald building. As they went up the stairs, they were discussing a question. The meeting was opened and conducted by Dan Jones, the president of the NRLA. He stated in a strong way the association could not continue to use the American Sentinel as the organ of the association unless it would modify its attitude towards some of what was termed the more objectionable features of the denominational views. A.T. Jones responded, stating that as long as he had anything to do with the editorship of the paper, there would be no change as suggested. The meeting assumed the form of a very warm discussion between those who took opposite sides of the question. You see, this was a private, secret meeting, invitation only, and Willie White was not invited. But Prescott and A.T. Jones were there, and about 40 people. At that point, someone locked the door, proposing that it should not be opened until the question was settled. A.F. Ballinger, pictured here to the right, NRLA Executive Committee member, stood to his feet and held up the most recent copy of the Sentinel, pointing out certain articles that should be omitted. A.T. Jones and C.P. Bowman had run articles in the paper on the Sabbath question, the Second Advent, and their relation to religious liberty. Many from the NRLA disapproved. They argued that the paper was read and approved by men of influence in the state and the church, and was not to offend their senses by declaring in a strong way the seventh-day Sabbath and the end of the world, that it would be suicidal to the interests of the American Sentinel and the NRLA. The meeting dragged on for hours in apparent deadlock, with the assertion on the part of the NRLA men that unless the Pacific press would accede to their demands and drop the strong articles along with the terms Seventh-day Adventist and the Sabbath from the Sentinel, they would no longer use it as the organ of the Adventist Association. And that meant killing the paper. Finally, a little before 3 o'clock in the morning, early Sunday morning, a vote was taken. The majority voted to drop the Sentinel and start another paper as the organ of the Religious Liberty Association. The door was now unlocked, and the men went off to their rooms to sleep, having only a few short hours before the 5:30 meeting. Can you imagine how A.T. Jones felt leaving that meeting? He was known as one of the most effective and hardest working men for the Sabbath and liberty of conscience, and he labored for the truth promoted in the Sentinel. His work in the 1888 Message, the National Sunday Law and Blair hearing, and the Sentinel stands today to help others be courageous for the truth. And at that time, Ellen White stood with him, and because of her stand, she was targeted by leading men in the conference, and her writings were brought into question as causing doubt and not promoted. But it did not end there with the secret meeting, although I bet Dan Jones and Ballinger went away at 3 a.m. feeling victorious. So what happened next? Sunday morning, about 5:20 a.m., Brethren A.T. Robinson, W.C. White, and Ellery Robinson were passing Mrs. White's residence on their way to the early meeting. They saw a light in her room, and her son ran up to inquire about her health. He found her busily engaged in writing. She then told him that an angel of God had wakened her about 3 o'clock in the morning and had bidden her to go to the ministers' meeting and relate some things shown her at Salamanca. She said that she rose quickly and had been writing for about 2 hours. At the ministers' meeting, an earnest season of prayer had just closed when Mrs. White entered with a package of manuscripts in her hand. With evident surprise, Elder Olson said, "We are glad to see you, Sister White. Have you a message for us this morning?" "Indeed I have," was her reply. She then said it had not been her plan to attend the meeting, but she had been awakened very early and instructed to prepare to relate to the brethren some things shown her at Salamanca. Now remember, she tried sharing this vision back in November and then the day before in March 3 times, but God stopped her. She had been shown in vision exactly what was happening at Battle Creek and also what had happened in a secret meeting when she was ushered into a council meeting where men were advocating their views and plans with great zeal and earnestness, but not according to knowledge. She stated at the 5:30 meeting what she was shown just hours before. Ellen White stated clearly as a matter of fact. One brother stood before the council with a paper in his hand and criticized the character of its contents. The paper was the American Sentinel. Pointing to certain articles, she said, or he said, "This must come out and that must be changed. If the Sentinel did not contain such articles as these, we could use it." The articles pointed out as objectionable were upon the Sabbath and the second coming of Christ. With clearness, Mrs. White spoke of the views and the attitude of the chief speakers in this council meeting. She referred to the harsh spirit manifested by some and to the wrong positions taken by others. She closed her remarks with a most earnest appeal that all should hold forth the truth in its perfection, and that the watchman should give the trumpet a certain sound. A solemn conviction rested upon the assembly, and all felt that they had been listening to a message from heaven. "I was present in one of your councils." One arose and in a very earnest, decided manner held up a paper. I could read the heading plainly, American Sentinel. There were criticisms made upon the articles published therein. It was declared that this must be cut out and that must be changed. Strong words were uttered, and a strong, unchristlike spirit prevailed. Ellen continued, "My guide gave me words to speak to the ones who were present, who were not slow to make their accusations. In substance, I will state the reproof given, that there was a spirit of strife in the midst of the council. The Lord had not presided in their councils, and their minds and hearts were not under the controlling influence of the Spirit of God. Let the adversaries of our faith be the ones to instigate and develop the plans which are being formed. While all the plans are not objectionable, principles are being brought in which will dishonor God." Personally, says O.A. Olson, I sat there in blank bewilderment. I did not know what she referred to. I had neither heard nor had any knowledge of the things that she presented, nor of such a meeting as she described. Indeed, I was so surprised and the things she presented as having taken place in that meeting seemed so unreasonable that I was quite nonplussed in my mind as to what this meant. When she finished, she sat down. Everybody looked at everybody else in astonishment. When could this have occurred? The president of the General Conference knew nothing about it. Most of the people there knew nothing about it, but a few at that meeting that morning knew all about it. Then Captain Eldridge arose and said, I was in that meeting last night after the close of the conference. Some of us met in my room in the review office, where we locked ourselves in, and there took up and discussed the questions and the matter that have been presented to us this morning. We remained in that room till 3 o'clock this morning. And then he added, if I should have begun to give a description of what took place and the personal attitude of those in the room, I could not have given it as exactly and as correctly as had been given by Sister White. I now see that I was in error, that the position I took was not correct, and from the light that has been given this morning, I acknowledge that I was wrong. There was now no question in anybody's mind as to the time of that meeting presented to Mrs. White on November 3rd of the previous year, which she was not permitted to speak of for those 4 months because the meeting had not then taken place and did not take place until the night of March 7th, 1891. You can see now why God held her back and did not permit those messages to come before the meeting took place. For had they been given before the meeting took place, the meeting never would have occurred because the men would have known about it. And so it was withheld from her until the hour, the very moment of the crisis. Then came the message in that most remarkable way. Ellen White, who for the first time set eyes upon the current issue of the Sentinel, the same one she had seen only in her dream, sat with a look of perplexity on her face. She turned to Brother Ballinger and exclaimed in amazement, Last night? The meeting was last night? Because of the train of events, she wrote later, years later in 1905, because of the train of events that led up to the morning meeting, Ellen White stated later that the excuse could not possibly be used. Someone told her. No one had an opportunity to see me or speak with me between the evening meeting and the morning meeting that I attended. Finally, the silence was broken by the weeping voice of A.F. Ballinger. Holding up the current issue of the American Sentinel, Ballinger pointed to the front page article and said, I was in the meeting last night, and I am the man who made the remarks about the articles in the paper. This is the article on the Sabbath referred to by Sister White, and I am the man who said such strong articles should not appear in the Sentinel. Ballinger went on to confess his error. I am sorry to say that I was on the wrong side, but I take this opportunity to place myself on the right side. At some point during the morning meeting, Dan Jones, who had led out in seeking to kill the Sentinel the night before, stood and confessed, Sister White, I thought I was right, and now I know I was wrong. And then humble Jones. Now, I would never have thought A.T. Jones would be humble. And that is a very good lesson to learn, is that when we study the history of Adventism and the pioneers and these people who stood for truth, especially this gentleman, our brother A.T. Jones, that you have to study their entire life. And because I had studied much of A.T. Jones, but I had always come to the conclusion that he was a very cocky man, and he didn't make friends easily. and he rubbed people the wrong way. And I was very impressed with his response to what Ballinger and the others had said, confessing how wrong they were and how they treated him and the American Sentinel. So A.T. Jones, who had watched as the Sentinels suffer apparent defeat, answered in his well-known voice with humility and self-forgetfulness. You are right now, anyhow. 2 weeks after this event, the General Conference, the same men at the conference she gave the vision to, voted to banish her to Australia. When God gave Ellen White the Salamanca vision and included Samuel 8 in it, Ellen did not know why God wanted her to preach on that until she was banished. The people would not have a prophet among them, just like Samuel, and it was God that they had rejected and not her. Years later, Ellen said, I have not, I think, revealed the entire workings that led me here to Australia. Perhaps you may never fully understand the matter. The Lord was not in our leaving America. He did not reveal that it was His will that I should leave Battle Creek. The Lord did not plan this, but He let you all move after your own imaginings. The Lord would have had W.C. White, his mother, and her workers remain in America where we were needed at the heart of the work. And had your spiritual perception discerned the true situation, you would never have consented to the movements made. But the Lord read the hearts of all. There was so great a willingness to have us leave, the Lord permitted this thing to take place. Those who are weary of the testimonies borne were left without the persons who bore them. Our separation from Battle Creek was to let men have their own will and way, which they thought superior to the way of the Lord. The Ellen White estate concluded the Salamanca letters and manuscripts with this paragraph. I submit, dear friends, that such a thing does not come from a religious reverie. We cannot explain that experience as a figment of the imagination, for God alone knows the thoughts of men when those thoughts are afar off, before they even come to a man's mind. And so it is that we might say not only in this, but in many circumstances, that God used His servant to bring His messages at the very time the messages were needed. I call this divine guidance at the time of crisis. Isaiah, the 58th chapter, says this, the Lord shall guide thee continually. Psalm 32 says, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will counsel you in Hosea. And then it says this, and by a prophet the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt, and by a prophet was she preserved. By a prophet the Lord led and guided Israel of old, and in the same way He will guide Israel of today. I think the General Conference leadership is emboldened today because we do not have a living prophet among us, but we have her beautiful writings of the spirit of prophecy. I have grown stronger in my confidence in Ellen White. She says she was humbled in the dust at that time by the leaders of the Advent movement, and yet God used her mightily then and now to help His people who are now living in gross darkness. Jehovah God gave an incredible vision to Ellen White, known as the Salamanca vision, where she saw what was happening on November 3rd, 1890, showing her the secret meeting in Battleground while she was in New York. He then showed her the secret meeting on March 7th in 1891, and exactly what was being said and done, and even the exact American sentinel being lifted up in the air. And God stopped her from sharing the vision until the timing was perfect. With such an incredible act of precision in vision and timing shared, you would think they would have realized they were fighting against God. You would think they would realize God knows all things and will not be mocked. For Luke 8:17 says, "For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known and come abroad." So what happened to the men who led that awful meeting? Apostasy. And we know that the victors write the history books. So if you go to the Adventist Encyclopedia, you're going to see a completely different history than what I'm about to share. Now, I've been studying these Adventists, that just incredible time period in our history. And like I said before, you've got to study them all the way through to their lives. And so there's so much information about each one. I just pulled a little snippet from each of these men's lives to share with you. We'll start with A.F. Ballinger, apostatized. Even though he repented at that meeting and then stood by A.T. Jones and the American Sentinel, he did fall away. Around 1900, Ballinger started teaching a new theology on salvation in Christ and also legal justification, or known as universal forgiveness, has already been given to all men. He then came out against the Adventist understanding of the investigative judgment and believed that the atonement occurred at Christ's crucifixion and that he had entered the most holy place at his ascension, contrary to SDA doctrine, which teaches that the atonement work continued in the heavenly sanctuary when Christ ascended to the holy place, and then in 1844, at the end of the prophetic period of 2,300 days, Christ entering the most holy place. He later was removed from his post as superintendent of Irish missions and dismissed from the church over the teaching. And then we have A.T. Jones. He delivered light from heaven in the 1888 Conference on Righteousness by Faith, made a valiant stand before Congress, Blair Committee, and the Breckinridge Bill, and along with Wagner was editor of the American Sentinel. Sadly, he joined Kellogg in apostasy and left Adventist leadership and eventually worked against Ellen White and the credibility of the spirit of prophecy. The ministerial credentials of A.T. Jones were withdrawn. In July of 1908, he had an interview with Ellen White, which was not at all satisfactory. He asked for a hearing at the General Conference session of 1909 held in Washington. The request was granted, and these meetings were held at which he stated his case. Elder A.V. Olson, who was present, reports, "Though not a delegate, I was invited to attend the last meeting, and seated on the platform were Brethren C.W. Flays, acting chairman, and W.T. Bartlett of England, acting secretary. At the table below the pulpit sat Brother A.G. Daniels, the General Conference president, and at one end, and at the other end, A.T. Jones. Before final action was taken, Brother Daniels arose and made a statement in which he said how much he personally had appreciated the fine, faithful, and efficient services that Brother Jones had rendered the cause during many years of association with us, how he had esteemed and loved him, and how our hearts had been filled with sorrow because of the misunderstanding and conflict that had come in to mar our sweet fellowship and to separate him from his brethren." Then turning to Brother Jones, he made a very tender, touching appeal for him to forget the past and to come back to stand shoulder to shoulder with his brethren in the service of the Lord. He assured him that we all loved him and that we wanted him to go with us in the march toward the kingdom of God. Extending his hand across the table, he said in a choking voice, "Come, Brother Jones, come." At this, Brother Jones arose, started to reach his hand across the table, only to draw it back. Several times, as Brother Daniels continued to plead, saying with tears in his voice, "Come, Brother Jones, come." Brother Jones would hesitatingly reach out his hand part way across the table and pull it back again. The last time he almost clasped the hand outstretched from the other side, then suddenly pulled it back and cried out, "No, no," and sat down. That was one of the saddest scenes that I have ever witnessed. There were not many dry eyes in the seminary chapel that afternoon. We all loved Brother Jones, and it grieved us to see him go out into the dark. Shortly after this, by formal action, he was dropped from the membership roll of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, of which for years he had been a member. Dan Jones. His repentance at the 1891 conference was feigned. He shortly after picked up his stand against the American Sentinel and A.T. Jones. I could not find much about that man, or even a photo. And if someone ever listens to this and you know anything about Dan Jones, oh, please do share it with me. I kind of wonder, was he a Jesuit? And then we have Prescott. Now, the General Conference in their encyclopedia gives a glowing account of Prescott. Oh, he's like a saint to them. We will take a look at Prescott when we go into the daily next week. A highly influential writer, scholar, and administrator among the Seventh-day Adventism's second generation of leaders, William Warren Prescott served the church for a total of 52 years, holding numerous senior leadership roles in education and publishing at the General Conference. He was a member of the General Conference Executive Committee for 42 years. He worked closely with Ellen White. Now, this is me talking. The above was the Adventist Encyclopedia. So I want to add here, he worked closely with Ellen White, attributed to assisting Ellen White in the revision of the Desire of Ages, and was in Australia with her. And while there, he went into a thrift store and purchased a book on Trinity. And I wonder if that was the beginning of his spiritual demise, or was apostasy already germinating in him, and this was a step forward in its development. Strange, he could work so closely with Ellen White and yet apostatize and influence others to apostatize so greatly. Now, J.S. Washburn gives a completely different account of W.W. Prescott. And this is just one little excerpt from a long letter Washburn wrote to his close friend Claude Holmes, April 18, 1920. On Wednesday afternoon, March 10th, as I was about to leave for Philadelphia, Professor Prescott called me to one side and said, "Why do you not come directly to me rather than to someone else and tell me that my teaching is of the devil?" I said to him, "I do not think I have used that expression in regard to your teaching here. You must have been misinformed. Yet candidly and honestly, it is true. I cannot accept your teaching as truth, but it is not a personal matter with me at all. You cannot seem to understand me. I respect you very highly as a brother and believe that God has bestowed upon you great talent. But as a brother, I have seriously thought of coming to you and telling you as a friend how unspeakably sorry I am you had not continued to teach the simple, mighty truths of the message. Instead of all these new theories, you could have been a great power in the work, wielding a mighty influence. But now The painful collapse of your influence in the denomination is exactly represented by the Protestant and its complete failure. He goes on to say in the same letter, he said to me, "Why do you make such a campaign against me and not against Daniels and others?" I answered, "I know that all this brood of new theories originated with you. I charge the present situation in the college principally to you. You told me in England, if you could get your teachings, especially the new doctrine of the daily, accepted by our people in America, it would change the whole face of the work. It is evident this prophecy is coming true. You brought these new doctrines to the college. You opened the door for a flood of new and strange teachings, and some of the teachers may have gone farther than you did, but you were the fountain of new theology." Now you see why we have a more sure word of prophecy by Ellen White. So I'll close with these two scriptures, one from the Old and one from the New. "Surely the Lord God will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants of the prophets." Amos 3:7. And we see he did just that with the Salamanca vision. And then Acts 3:22. "For Moses truly said unto the fathers, A prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren, like unto me. Him shall ye hear in all things whatsoever he shall say unto you." God bless you all. Thank you for listening.